Hello everybody and welcome to the Monolithic megabase. I'm Tumbling Satellite and today we're taking a look at this bizarre version of a megabase. Now, what do I call a monolithic megabase, you ask? Well, it's a train-based megabase where all builds are designed with one very simple concept in mind. Or straight to science. No trains for intermediary products, everything is done on location. In fact, the only products allowed in trains are raw ores and oil, but I'm not using any in the builds proper. Science and train fuel. I did not want to bother making train fuel on location, but it's entirely doable and you can feel free to give it a shot yourself. And if starting from scratch isn't your thing or feels daunting, you can find all of my blueprints on my Discord. Link is in the description below. Now, let's address the elephant in the room real quick. What the hell is this spaghetti mess on screen? It's my starter base. I livestream these attempts at twitch.tv/ChummelingSatellite, and in order to break the monotony of the early game, up to the first rocket launch, I decided to just completely wing it and go full-on spaghetti. You know, build it where it fits mode, like it was my first or second playthrough instead of going with a classic bus. And quite honestly, it was refreshing at first. Until I hit purple and yellow science, then it was hell. There's a reason why people don't build spaghetti after all. I mean, look at that. Look at this whole garbage mess everywhere. This is my yellow science, for instance. Yeah. But maybe that was just a premonition of the pains that were to come. This megabase is an output of 2.7 thousand science per minute, or one full blue belt of each science pack, consumed every second. Entirely scalable, and I could easily double that like I've done in previous bases, but I like my UPS, and my computer does not like the idea of doubling up, especially when live streaming. When I'm not streaming and or recording, the game runs at a solid 60 FPS, which would most likely be halved if I doubled throughput. Let's say it's a proof of concept more than anything else. All the designs are 100% mine, with two notable exceptions, the balancers and the smelting arrays. Smelting arrays are from Nilhouse, check him out if you don't know him, on YouTube and Twitch, and the balancers are from various blueprints I found online or that viewers very kindly provided. Because I am not a patient man, designing balancers is my personal version of hell. Final disclaimer, I play Factorio, and most of my games actually, entirely vanilla, not a single mod install, not even quality of life. I do this for a variety of reasons, but mainly for compatibility for other people's playthroughs, to better showcase the game to new players, and for multi-platform games, so that everybody can enjoy the same experience, no matter the platform. Although I guess Factorio is a multi-platform game now? But anyway, without further ado, let's dive right in the first build of this monolithic megabase. And it may surprise you, but it's not even a science build. This was the first monolithic build I designed, and it shows in places, but it does the job well enough. The thing, right here, produces a level 3 speed module every 2 seconds and a level 3 productivity module every 2 seconds as well. In my experience, while building, it was more than enough to churn out these modules while I was designing, but your mileage may vary if you're simply stamping down blueprints, so you may need a second one of these. Let's see what is required for this blueprint. 10,000 blue belts, 1.8 thousand speed modules, 1.7 thousand rails, 1.5 thousand underground, 1.3 thousand productivity modules, 853 beacons, and the rest is probably pocket change at this stage. The eagle-eyed among you may have noticed the odd train stacker in the bottom left corner here. Wait, no, that's the bottom right corner. What did I write? I call it the grill, or the toaster, or the radiator, depending on the mood. This is my first actual train stacker, and I like it. So I decided to make it standard for all my builds. This way, no train deadlock when we first start up a build, and 2 bajillion trains decide to rush in at once. Now let's go into the core of this bad boy. Oop, that's me. First, the train stations. I use standard train stations of my own designs, where with a bit of logic, trains are only called if there's enough space in the chest to fully unload them, avoiding trains sitting at unloading stations indefinitely or until a loading station frees up. The principle is rather simple, and if you've dabbled a bit in logic, you should be familiar with this, but let me run you through it real quick. The constant combinator here has two constants, tells me the capacity of the chest here, and the capacity of a single train in these two variables. Well, more like constant, actually. The arithmetic combinator below counts how much space is available. As you can see here, it's 10,000, the output signal D on the right of the screen. And the one below that counts how much it's worth in train. Right now, it's 0. There is no train being called because there is not enough space in the chest to welcome a train. Output that variable to your train stop as a train limit. It's a train limit to the locomotive here, and voila, you have got a build that will only call trains when it's necessary. So that's pretty groovy, I would say. For these, it can call 0 to 4 trains, which is why the stacker can have 18 trains here, and you can have another train here. So this flows pretty well. For this build, we have 3 stations, iron, copper, and coal. And we're actually going to start with coal here. And of course it's nighttime. Why is it always nighttime when I record? Good question. At least we have the lights. So this is my coal liquefaction build. Pretty straightforward. 12 refineries, 14 chemical plants set to heavy oil cracking, and 28 for light oil cracking. It's slightly overkill for this modules build, but this design was actually for one of my previous playthroughs, and I felt like it fit nicely in there, so I kept it as is. Get used to it, because you'll see much more of it. Each refinery has its own boiler attached to it, and I'm using coal to feed them, because I just couldn't be bothered with making solid fuel there. As it worked well enough with coal anyway. You'll have to start it up with a big old barrel of pocket heavy oil, but once it's done, it's completely self-sustaining, and it shouldn't backlog. Never caught it doing so anyways. I recommend placing the assembler here for the heavy oil barrels, but once it's done, you can just remove it. The way I ensure it does not backlog is with the absolutely tiniest amount of logic. Since coal liquefaction recipe requires its input as an output, or more like its output as an input, now that I think about it, in the form of heavy oil, I ensure to only crack the heavy oil into lighter products if I have enough stored up. The way I do that is I measure how much I have in a tank, and I set a condition to this pump to only run if we have more than 2,000. If we have less than 2,000, the oil is sent up back here to be made into more oil, and the excess is cracked into light oil. Same goes with the tank at the bottom here. This way, once it's started, we're good to go forever. Light oil isn't needed, so only petroleum gas, so in turn, we crack all the light oil, and voila, we've got our petroleum gas pipes here. Now, you may ask, why coal liquefaction and not advanced oil processing? Well, I needed the coal for the plastic anyway, so why bother adding an oil train station and more trains to the network when I already have the stuff in here? Plus I found my design pretty cool, so I felt like using it. In the end, personal preference, I guess. Next up are these copper and iron smelting. Pretty straightforward, not much to say about these, so I'll skip right through them. Let's go to plastic. This plastic build can churn out the full belts necessary for the red circuits down below. It's not perfect and pretty simple, but it does the job well enough. For bigger bits though, we'll need something a bit more clever, but we'll see that in time. Now this is my first version of a green circuits build. As you can see, I do direct insertion of the copper wires in there. It was in a general effort to reduce the overall amount of inserters used in the factory, as these are the main culprits of the UPS loss when scaling up, for me anyway. This build isn't perfect, and there is actually a better version of the next builds, but it does the trick here. And down below are the red science builds. You will notice I make the copper cables on top of each column. I love such designs, and in that case, it also means fewer belts, so it's a win-win. I used 8 beacon designs all over because I find 12 beacons are a bit repetitive and less creative, to each their own. And next up are the blue circuits. A bit annoying to weave the sulfuric acid through, but I was obstinate and didn't want to move the build over a few tiles because I wanted to reuse these beacons from the red circuits. Maybe not necessary, but who knows. You may also notice the green circuit belts down there. It's because the belts on top aren't actually enough to feed all of these hungry hypos of assemblers, so I need to bring a little bit of extra for these assemblers down there. I don't even bother lane balancing yet, we're not producing enough for it to be an issue here. And finally, the modules themselves. There's a bit of creative work here with splitters, so let me run you through it. First we have all level 1 modules, well, assembler modules, taking in green circuits from the left, here, and red circuits from both the left and the right. The output is on the far side of the right belt. Now, in order to keep all of these fed with enough green circuits, we have to bring in more than half a belt, so that's what we're doing here with a mixed belt of greens and blues, with a filter here to only let the blue go through on this side, as we don't need the greens further down the line. As you can see here, we don't have a belt here. Then it's to the level 2 modules. Basically the same as level 1, but mirrored, where we take the red circuits and level 1 modules from the right, the blue circuits from the left here, and output the modules on the far side of the left belt to feed the level 3 assemblers down here. Now we use the same trick as earlier to be able to feed enough red circuits in here. A bit of filtering again to avoid the red circuits, and voila! We have our level 3 modules. Now, there are definitely some improvements that can be made for this build, but it works well enough and is quite compact, so I didn't bother going through it again in too many details. Next up is the much simpler red and green science combined build. The recipes are similar enough when doing monolithic that I did that in a single place, and seeing how compact the build is, I think it's actually a good idea. I may even reuse this in subsequent factories to save up on a few trains. It requires 2.1 thousand belts, 1.7 thousand rails, 556 and 518 speed and productivity modules respectively, 360 underground, 262 beacons, etc, etc, so it's relatively cheap as expected. Well, for a monolithic build that is. We just refine the iron and copper right here, and output it down in these 8 columns, 4 for each science. I use the same trick I used for the red circuits, making the intermediate products in each column for simplicity's sake. For the red science, it's really straightforward, not much to say about it. We just lane balance here at the end, and there we are, 1 full belt. The green science here is a bit more elaborate. We have the copper wires being fed directly into the green circuits, and that's actually it for copper. All the other ingredients can be made from iron. We take said iron for the green circuits, which we output on the left, then throw on the inside of the belt. The gears are used both for belts and inserters, and we output them on both sides, otherwise the throughput is not quite sufficient. Assemblers and belts are then put on a single belt, which is then fed into the green science assemblers. I don't even bother lane balancing these, and we've just got our full belt of science. Finally, we've got the loading stations. Same principle as the unloading stations for the logic, so I won't go into details this time. Just know that we only call in a train if we got enough resources in the chest to fill it completely. Also note that we have lights and colored trains and train stations because we're not barbarians. The loading stations are the same across the whole factory, the only difference is that we have 2 instead of 1 on this build. Lastly, I did not mention that earlier, but we've got the fuel. We got a dedicated small fuel train, which is somewhere in here. It's actually coming. And going. The only thing it does is unload a bit of nuclear fuel in here, and when there is no more, we're calling the train and a few robots fill the train locomotives with the fuel air so that they never run out. Next up is chemical science. As you can see, we've already gone far bigger in size. It takes 5.3 thousand blue belts, 1.9 thousand speed modules, 1.7 thousand rails, 1.6 thousand productivity modules, 1.3 thousand underground, and 959 beacons, so we definitely are way more expensive. Just like the modules, we only need 3 stations though, 1 for iron, 1 for copper, 1 for coal. One trick I use here is that I actually have unloading on both sides for the iron ore, one side feeding the iron plates, and the other one feeding steel, because the steel blueprint I use refine it straight from iron ore. This saves me the pain of trying to balance things or have another iron train station. We have the same petroleum gas from coal liquefaction build down here that we saw earlier, and here is a steel build that churns out 2 belts of the stuff. Yes, still is a pain, and if you're familiar with the game, you know the worst is yet to come. Iron, copper, plastic, green and red circuits, the usual suspects are here, along with a tiny and very cute singular sulfur factory. Now let's focus on the new things, the engine units. These require 3 ingredients, gears, pipes and steel. We bring the steel and iron from the left here, hello to save. These are the only 2 ingredients we need. Feed the iron into the gears and the pipes, put them both on a belt and feed that into the assemblers on one side, steel on the other, filtering at the end, and there we are, engine units. Only thing left is the science itself up there. And as you can see, nothing complex, we have all the ingredients. We just put them in the assemblers, filter again, and there we are. That's our belt of chemical science done. Next is the one I always forget, and even forgot while writing the script, military science. I actually designed this last, so I had a bit more fun with it. Takes in 1 train of each raw resource, so it's not too bad. This build takes 3.6 thousand belts, 1.9 thousand rails, 888 speed modules, 709 undergrounds, 512 productivity modules, and 390 beacons. Now for the new things in this build that we haven't seen before, we have the stone bricks refining, once again taken from Neil House, and then these 2 adorable wall assemblers. Now, don't get fooled, they look like 12 beacon, but actually only 8. Why did I shape it like this? Well, now that I look at it again, no clue, but that's what we're dealing with now. Up there are grenades. Not much to say about those, taking in coal from one side, iron plates from the other. And next are the piercing ammo. And I'm doing direct insertion here, the ratios aren't perfect, and the basic ammo assemblers in the middle aren't working constantly, but it allows me to do a bit more direct insertion, so why not? And it works well enough, as you can see. Finally, the science itself, and by now you know the trick, 2 products on one belt here on the right side, 1 on the inside of the other, the output on the free lane, we filter at the end, balance, and there's our full belt of military science. Standard stuff. Now we're bringing in the pain. Purple science. Yes, you're seeing that right. 4 unloading stations for iron ore alone, and 1 for copper, stone, and coal. Are you ready for this? This build takes 25,000 belts, 3.7 thousand speed modules, 3.4 thousand undergrounds, 2.6 thousand productivity modules, 2.2 thousand rails, and 1.7 thousand beacons. Yup, we're in the big boy factory now. So, remember that massive steel build from earlier that was making 2 full belts? Yeah, we need 3 of those now. Right here. For a total of 6 belts. And here started to appear the problem that would be the bane of the rest of this playthrough.
Lane balancing.
Now, for this purple science build, I need exactly 6 belts, fully saturated, but then split into 8. Now, just use a balancer, right? I've got a balancer boo right here. As a matter of fact, here's a 628 balancer. Yeah, about that. Turns out, most balancers that are not powers of 2 are not throughput unlimited, which means even if you feed it 6 full belts, so 270 steel per second, it will not actually output 270 steel per second on 8 belts. Which means you introduce a bottleneck and you won't have your 2.7 thousand science per minute at the end. So, How do you do away with these balances, you ask? Well, with the magic of spaghetti! Woo! Turns out these steel builds actually produce slightly more than 2 blue belts if fed with iron ore constantly. So I just gathered the extra here and made that into a 7th belt. And there we go. Next, I just did some fumbling around with belt foo and awful splitters with priorities, and we have our steel. Don't worry, it gets much worse later. So, we need 3 ingredients for production science. 1 electric furnace, 1 productivity module, and 30 rails, which makes 3 science packs. Yes, rails. Rails can go burn in hell where they belong. I initially tried to do a 12 beacons and rail setup, again, and didn't work, again, so that's what we ended up with. Down here we make the iron sticks, and you can tell I was getting fed up with this, because this build is anything but clean, but I was just trying to get the throughput I needed by adding more stuff until it worked. And it works now, so I'm not touching it. Don't fix what isn't broken, as we say in the trade. Now, the rail design itself works well for a full belt of rails per column. A bit overkill, but compared to the pain and suffering I received with a 12 beacon build, I'll take that any day of the week. Now, we've got green circuits, plastic, oil, yada yada, red circuits, you're used to it by now. And then it's the furnaces and productivity modules. Those are pretty simple, so I won't go into detail on those. Feel free to pause the video to check them out or see the blueprint. Now, initially, I had the furnaces here on top of each column, like that of the science, like I did for the red and green science builds, for instance. But I had trouble keeping the furnace assembles fed with all their ingredients fast enough, so I ended up separating them in their own build in some free space I had. Works pretty well in the end, and we've got our belt of purple science. Not without a lot of pain, mind you. 2 more to go. Yellow science, or utility science, is next. About the same size as purple science, albeit with a different form factor. Similar requirements too. 22,000 belts, 3.1 thousand speed modules, 2.8 thousand productivity modules, 2.4 thousand undergrounds, 1.9 thousand rails, and 1.5 thousand beacons for the main stuff. What's interesting to note here is that our good old coal liquefaction setup with 12 refineries isn't enough anymore, so I had to expand it slightly to get 16 refineries, while not feeding it more coal belts. Worked well enough in the end by looping around the belt that was feeding the boilers right back in there for the extra ones. But that trick is not going to work if we need more than 16. Another remarkable thing is the fact that we turn heavy oil into lubricant now, as well as cracking it. And we do it right here, by adding this extra pump, with a condition that it only activates at 1000 heavy oil in the tank, and still 2000 for the cracking. Here, we establish this kind of priority for the heavy oil use. 1. More coal liquefaction, back in there. 2. Making lubricant. And 3. Cracking the rest into light oil, then petroleum gas. This way we ensure again that we will never starve our build of heavy oil and have to restart it manually. Now, let's focus again on copper for a second there. This copper build caused me the most pain, probably in the entire factory, even more so than the rails. You see, I knew I needed to churn out 18 full belts of copper, so what did I do? I put 18 of the copper smelting columns next to each other, build all the rest of the factory, and then perfect, right? Well, no. You see, balancing is a big issue. These smelting columns consume actually slightly less than 1 belt of ore because of all the modules and stuff. So 16 belts of copper ore are enough for this, and that's perfect because that's 2 full trains. The real issue is that I need to turn these into 20 belts of copper plates, as you can see here. And the balancing to do that? Ludicrous. What I ended up doing after several tries is this abomination you can see now. For the input, I use an 18-18 balancer with 2 input lane empty here. Now that I look at it again, I should have slid the input lane one time to the left so that only the far left and far right inputs are unoccupied. Too late, already made a blueprint out of that, not changing it. Then, I've got an 8x8 throughput unlimited balancer here, along with a 9th belt coming from somewhere I will show in a second. Plus a 12 to 12 balancer, which 11th belt is half fed from the 9th belt from earlier, which totals 20 belts. Now, where did I get this extra belt? These. Here. You see, just like the steel builds, these melting arrays actually produce slightly more than one belt, and the extra is just wasted. The extra capacity is just wasted. You can see this one here, for instance, having backed up. When I saw these idle furnaces, I thought maybe, just maybe, if I gathered all of that, I would have enough for one more belt. And I did. It's awful, I'm ashamed, moving on. Low density structures. Now, this build is an interesting one. We've got copper coming from the bottom, plus plastic and steel from the top. Each column here eats a full belt of copper, since as you know, low density structures crave copper like we French people crave cheese, so there was no way the classic 3 input products build would work. Instead, I have the plastic and steel come right through the assemblers, leaving 3 space between each assembler so that they stay beacon aligned. There's probably a better way of doing this, but hey, this one is mine, and I like it. The previous sulfur and sulfuric acid build have been expanded and beaconed further, because batteries are now a necessity on top of providing acid for the blue circuits. Not much to say here, except that I'm struggling to balance the iron so much that I'm re-injecting what's left of the iron back into the bus we have running down here, for that extra tidbit of throughput. That was when I was desperately trying to get a bit more throughput. I'm not sure it's necessary, but it's there. Next up are the processing units, with a build that is way different from the one you saw from the modules. In here, I do direct insertion of the red circuits, to again save on inserters, since the ratios of reds to blues is close to 1. It's a few more assemblers for the red circuits than is strictly necessary, but it's a small price to pay for UPS. Notice how every other build is mirrored? That's because these pesky sulfuric acid pipes can't fit in between the modules. So I have to have extra rows of the stuff between lines and beacons. Oh well, power is basically free in the endgame anyway. We're not done yet, since we need to craft the flying robot frames. These require, amongst other things we already have, electric engine units, themselves requiring engine units. Cue this build. Again, I do some direct insertion with a similar setup as for the processing units, but this time with lubricants instead of sulfuric acid on top. Pipes and gears are again crafted on location. The output of electric engine units is then mixed with a belt of batteries here to be fed into the flying robot frames. Since these also require steel and green circuits, like the engine units and electric engine units respectively, I just have this mixed belt go through and be refilled of green circuits, which we'll need more of. Gotta admit, I'm pretty proud of that one. Now the flying robot frames are pretty annoying, as they require 4 distinct ingredients. Fortunately, on low quantities, so I just have to have all the ingredients comes from belts on each side, and have the output go through the middle, kind of like the reverse of what I did for the low density structures. And finally, the science itself. You know the trick by now, only difference is that the last 2 inserters here go on the inside of the belt instead of the outside like the rest, as it's the side that is depleted first, and I found during testing that with inserter rotation speed and whatnot, that could create a few occasional holes in the final science belt, which do not appear if I do it that way. Overall, the last part of this build is probably my favorite in the entire factory. Look at how clean, compact, organized and square that is. I may even frame it. Moving on to space science, and oh my god, I was not prepared. I thought I was, but no. I got slapped back into reality, hard. This madness contraption you see here consumed 69,000 belts, 6,600 speed modules, 5,800 productivity modules, 5,600 undergrounds, 3,200 beacons, 2,800 underground pipes, 2,600 pipes, 2,400 arrays, 4,800 inserters, 1,600 splitters, and a solid chunk of my soul. Let's take a closer look at it, if I can refrain from retching, that is. 4 copper train stations, 3 iron, 2 coal. At least turning this thing on looked beautiful, with all the trains arriving at once to provide their sweet, sweet resources. And yes, these are 32 belts of copper ore on a dedicated bus. But let's go to oil. So, remember when I said that 16 refineries in a build was stretching it? Well, apparently 17 works too, with a few changes. Why 17? Because I needed a whooping 51 refineries churning out constantly for this madness of a build, and you've got them there. Also, 13 water pumps. Hello to save, always glad to see you. And if it wasn't enough, we will also have to use the light oil to craft the rocket fuel, so we need to pipe that as well. Same as with the heavy oil earlier, we only crack the excess light oil, the priority goes to the rocket fuel. At least that part works, and remains relatively simple overall. Plastic has seen a few changes from my previous builds, because they were not working at full speed. Let's take a look, this is one of the previous builds. See, when you have 8 chemical plants like that, they are supposed to provide 2.2 full belts of output, more than the 2 I would need. Then why is this thing not running full, you ask? Well, getting the plastic onto the belts is the issue. 1 inserter for the output is simply not enough. And then you have the problem, if you want to put 2, of not filling the belts equally, and it becomes a small nightmare. Cue this build. Made thanks to Twitch chat, when my patience was running thin, this one can actually output all the plastic we want. Now we've got our 8 full belts. Little bit creative belting was involved to get the resources where they needed to be, but if you're not either craving or absolutely disgusted by spaghetti right now, you have more resilience than I do. And since we mentioned it earlier, let's go to the rocket fuel, with the solid fuel first. I could have made a build with direct insertion, since the ratios of chemical plants to assemblers are close enough from 2 to 1, but it didn't cross my mind at the time. Oh well, maybe next time. Only having liquid input for the solid fuel makes the build really easy. I just lane balance in the middle here, then once more at the bottom to have 8 nice full compressed belts down here, and feed that to the rocket fuel assemblers. Now, these are more interesting. As you can see, alternate which side of the belt the pipes are and the assemblers are, to be able to fit them all within this form factor. That leaves me just enough space for the power poles, not enough for substations, but it works perfectly and looks crazy neat. Not enough space for lights, unfortunately, but it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make for such a beautiful design. I could have the belts be underground to have lights, but let's not get too crazy. The belts join on top, and we've got a rocket fuel belt. Only 2 more products to go for the rocket silo. Oh yeah, one thing I did not mention was this petroleum gas balancer. It's actually a generic fluid balancer of my own design. Balances the gas between all 6 tanks. Works pretty well, although the balancing speed is not amazing. Now the iron smelting down here meets the same issue as the copper smelting from earlier. And I need to perform even more belt madness than before to get it to work. You have no idea how many times I tried to get enough full belts out of this, but the balancing made me tear my head off my scalp. I never want to look at this thing again. The copper smelting, on the other hand, gives us 32 magnificent belts of copper. The problem is we need to split that into 37. Introducing an even worse splitter than before. Puking bags are on the left if you need them. I do. But that gives us an excuse to look at the new and improved green circuits build. Ooh. Now, I pasted the old one for reference. One thing you may notice, maybe not, is that on the old one, this assembler here was actually aligned with the beacons, meaning it was not getting the full effect of the stuff. It's been corrected now, and we get almost a full belt of green circuits out of 1 column, so that's pretty nifty. One possible improvement would be to switch the copper cable and green circuits assembler on top in order for the copper cable to no longer be the limiting factor, yielding us maybe 1 or 2 extra circuits per minute, but I'll leave that as an exercise to you if you feel like it. I know. More balancing shenanigans, and bus crossing, and we're down to the blue circuits. Same as before, but with even more. I actually had to change it around a bit on the grid circuits part to ensure full throughput. I may reuse this design for subsequent playthroughs. It's pretty neat, only taking in copper, greens, plastic and sulfuric acid to get blue circuits. Neat. Could even make it more compact too, but no need for that here. Not much to say about the low density structures here, or the red circuits for that matter, so let's go to the rocket control units right here. Fun fact! Did you know that rocket control units and its main sub-ingredient, speed modules, only consume green, red and blue circuits? Well, I didn't, and we both do now. It ends up looking like this, with 5 assemblers for the speed modules on top and 16 for the rocket control units. All of that times 8. Overall, pretty neat. Now we're only missing the satellites. Hopefully these aren't tumbling. Fortunately and completely coincidentally, we already have all the ingredients to make them nearby. We're just making the solar panels and accumulators here, plus the radars from the iron plates, batteries, steel, green circuits, and copper. Pretty simple, but I still had to bring in a second belt of greens in order to keep the whole thing fed. We're barely cutting it on the solar panels. And finally, the rocket silos. You'll notice I buffer some low-density structures, rocket control units, and rocket fuel in chest, in order to have them ready just after rocket launch. This way, when a rocket is ready to receive ingredients, they don't just come from the belt, which would be too slow for our purpose. We output the space science here via 2 chests to ensure we never waste any by launching a rocket without having unloaded all the science from the silo, with the added effect of lane balancing, not that it matters really. Throw that in chests, and that's our space science. One small difference on the space science train is that it's limited to 30,000 units of the stuff, like the other science trains, and not to the ludicrous hundreds of thousands I would get if I let that run unabated. They only technically need 2.7 rocket silo, which is why I'm okay with them not working constantly, and to make sure I don't overproduce for no good reason, I have a bit of logic right here. See, I only insert the satellites on this belt if we have more than 4 full trains worth of science. No, less than 4 trains worth of science, so that we don't end up with millions upon millions of space science in storage, like it's happened before in previous playthroughs. All of that is well and good, but without labs, we're not going to do much with all this science. Introducing the labs. Enough to consume 1 full belt of each science, and technically even a bit more, up to 3,000 I believe, if you're so inclined. Not all the labs run constantly, but that's fine. This design's actually a rehash from my previous Cityblock-based playthrough, and I didn't change it in the slightest. Seeing it now, there are probably a few things one could improve. Like here, the belt mixing could happen sooner to save a bit of space on top. But it does the job well enough, and as a proof of that is the production screen for science. Yup. I could let it run for 10 hours, but I would need to tap into other patches, and I'm really done with this playthrough, so it's good enough for me. Plus I actually forgot to turn off the game after the stream once, so we backlogged a lot. Whoops, I guess. Before we wrap up here, a couple things I did not mention at the beginning of the video. The world is a rail world with mostly default settings, except for water, which was made into tiny puddles. I ended up regretting this, as this would have been much better for nuclear power. Yes, nuclear power. I always did solar in my previous playthrough and I wanted to change from it, so I went nuclear. I can already hear people going, "Further, my PS, nuclear bad." But since they changed the fluids to be on their own thread, the difference between solar and nuclear is barely noticeable on this scale anyway. Also, you don't need an absolutely massive field of solar arrays with robots or spiders everywhere to build them, revealing fewer chunks of the map. So all in all, I think I'm going nuclear in the future, plus it's way more fun to build. This is actually a design in progress, you can see it's not symmetrical. These ones are running, so I tried something a bit different here. It's something I'm gonna have to work out, but maybe in creative mode one day. You may also notice the lack of defenses. Well, this is not peaceful modes, and the biters are present. I had these Spidertrons here go around and clean up the surrounding areas in increasingly larger circles around the factory, but I knew that if I left the game run unattended for a while, pollution would spread further and activate attacks while I was AFK. The reason why I was sure of that is that it actually happened. Not wanting this playthrough to last for ages, I wanted to use a console command to look further, but made a big mistake and accidentally revealed way too much of the map, making the save file absolutely humongous and the game very slow. In order to salvage my mistake, I used console commands again to ungenerate the chunks beyond our vision. They are still biters, they are just really far away. The save file still took a massive hit in size, and the UPS never got better after that. Oh well. And that is it for the monolithic megabase. Would I recommend doing this yourself? Maybe, probably not on this scale though. Red and green science were really fun and satisfying, and I will definitely use that design again. Blue science was cool, but yellow and purple started breaking me. Space science just finished me off. I guess there is a reason why people don't do that after all. But it was a fun experience, trying to play with direct insertion a bit more, and overall I think it was quite successful. That inspired me for future factories too. I've got 2 in the tubes right now. The first one has already started on Twitch, and is to design 2 blueprints. One for an all-in-one starter base for something like 30 science per minute, up to the first rocket launch. And then an all-in-one base for around 50, 100, 500 SPM. I don't know yet, which is all straight to research this time, not even science trades, all in one place. Maybe using robots more, I don't know yet. The second idea is to push the idea of monolithic even further and only allow one item to be crafted in a single location. To give you an idea, for 2,500 SPM like this factory, I would need to have a place producing 33 belts of green circuits, or a smelting array making 59 belts of copper. That's gonna be a fun spaghetti once again. Anyway, that's all for me today. Again, blueprints are in my Discord, link is in the description below. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Have a good one, everybody. Bye-bye.